Well, hello everyone. Rick Gurgitz here again with the Red Power Stores, and this is a continuation in our series of combine videos. Today's focus is going to be on our mid-range combines. Videos I've made in the past have been mostly focused on flagship, so it's time to get caught up again. Our base mid-range machine's been around for a long time. We're going to go over a lot of the settings and things that will help you have a successful harvest. A lot of information that we'll go through today is going to be repeated when we do our combine clinics, and this is just kind of a nice refresher. We'll post this video on our company's website, and then after the clinic you can go back and look at different segments of it. We'll kind of break it up. We'll go cover the feeder area, then we're going to do threshing, concave area, and then move back to sieves, and finally at the back a little bit on residue management. So we've got a 2577 and a 7150. So as we think back on this, a lot of this information will apply for everything clear back, if you go back to 1480s all the way up to 7150, 7160. So a lot of that base technology was set up in the late 70s and still continues on to this day. So we'll go over a lot of the different settings. So as we start with any good harvest operation, as we transition or feed the material into the machine out of the head, a lot of it starts with right here and how well we're getting it transitioned and if we're feeding everything smoothly. If we think of the big picture with this, we really want a nice smooth crop mat formation here as it comes out of the head and into our feeder house area. That way, as it moves up the feeder house, gets into the transition cone, the cage, so forth. If we have a nice even crop mat, it makes the whole process work a lot better. Whereas if we've got a lot of bunches going in, inconsistency, then as it enters the rotor cage, we're going to have the same problem. You're going to have a lot of inconsistent wads. Threshing doesn't work as well, everything. So again, the smoother we can transition things from the head into the machine, the better off we are. So a lot of that starts with where we have our faceplate angle set. And again, we're on our little bit older machine here, 2577. We'll kind of go over some of this. We'll move over to the newer machine that has the newer style faceplate on it. Principles are all the same. So depending on whether we're doing beans or corn, we're going to want to get the faceplate angle set. You got to accomplish a couple things. You got to make the head do its job, but then we also want to get the transition in this area as smooth as we can. So let's take a bean head at first, whether it be auger or draper, and we'll focus on auger. Typically we're going to want our faceplate back quite a bit in the scheme of things, because then we're lessening this dead zone area between the cross auger of the bean head and where this is going to get a hold of that crop mat and start feeding it in here. When we move into a draper head, it simplifies things a lot as far as this angle, but then also that feeding in out of a draper head is much more consistent and smoother coming off of that center draper belt feeding into this area. So again, faceplate angle is very important, depending on which head we're on. Again, then when we get to corn heads, a lot of time we have to be cognizant of the angle of our deck plates of the head, especially if we're using a chopping corn head, because that chopper angle, deck plate angle, all that plays a lot into the performance of the corn head. So again, look your feeder faceplate angle over, kind of get it adjusted for whichever head you have. Depends again a lot on which head you have. With the draper heads, we have a lot more leniency, because depending on where we're at with this plate, the center tilt knife cylinder of the draper head will compensate for it. So in other words, if we have this set rearward quite a ways, we can tilt that cylinder out a little bit and compensate for it, vice versa. So the draper heads do give us a huge advantage in faceplate angle and feeding into the machine. So again, as we feed into these, couple things, we're going to look at faceplate angle. Another thing is what type of drum do we have and where do we set the drum stops. Again, we want this crop to transition in here as easily as possible. So where we set our drum stops over here on the side are very important, and we'll get a better look at this in a moment. But the theory of this is with drum stops, it's how far does it let the drum sit in the head essentially before we start harvesting. So if we think about that in depth a little bit more, this drum is free to float up and down. And depending on where we have the stop set determines where do we start and what does a crop mat have to do to get in this feeder house. So if we look at that or think about that a little bit more, do we want the crop mat to have to lift this drum up all day long? And the answer is no. We want that drum up as far as we can, and we can adjust that on the side. Here's the thing where people get confused. Essentially, this is our old, what they called stone retarder drum. And this is where the confusion comes from. Back in the old days, when the 1460s, 1480s first come out in the late 70s, we didn't have a rock trap in a lot of these. So we didn't have the extra protection from the rock trap. The only protection we had is if we locked the drum down, that way if a stone entered in here, it would wedge here, because the drum wasn't allowed to float up at that point. It would wedge here, and hopefully then we'd come back here and slip the feeder slip clutch. That was semi-successful. A lot of times you still ended up bending stuff. Well, as time has gone on, we've got rock traps now to take care of that same stone protection. We still have the stone retarder drum in there on this vintage machine and older, but we still need to let this thing float up. We don't want this to have to spin on the crop mat to get it started, because it's just going to start bunching that crop mat up. We want to open this up, and that's going to allow the crop mat to slide under there easier. So we'll touch on those settings for what we're going to do for where we're going to set our stops. So as we start looking at our adjustments that we've been referring to, let's just start with this faceplate angle right up. So basically right here, we're going to loosen these bolts up and the ones down in here, and then we can use this draw bolt to actually adjust our faceplate back and forth. And again, this is going to vary. There's no one setting for everybody. Varies with what head we're using, what tire size we happen to have on the machine, so the overall height of the machine affects this, and then if you're sinking in mud and whatnot. So really, this setting, you got to be very, pay attention to this, but it's going to vary greatly depending on what we're doing. The other one we were just referring to again on this drum stop, on the newer machines, they started coming with this label on it. This system has been here for years and years, even on the older ones. It's referring to this Z slot that's cut right down in here. And again, this is where we can adjust this is what the drum arms are sitting on. So this adjusts our initial, how far down are we starting with. And this is right where I want this is at. Up here we have the corn icon. We're in the upper slot, and we're good for that for corn and soybeans. So again, make sure your drum, instead of setting like this, is we got our drum up here, it lets the crop mat get in there and start much easier that way. One other thing, so if we go back in years, we've always had this adjustment. We've also got an upper limit on how far up do we want this to go. This is where we come into this, what used to be the stone retarder drum. Years ago, this washer had 4 different dimensions on it. There was a skinny side, a fat side, and depending on where you turn that would determine what the upper limit of the drum travel was. Well, now they've changed this on, at least on these 77s, they've gone to a slot here. So we loosen these 2 jam nuts up. You can lift and lower this drum stop in whatever position you want, and we want these up as far as they can go. So we're going to start with this one clear up and this one clear up too, to allow more material and smoother feeding into the feeder house. Are there any conditions where we might want to lower this setting? One one I can think of is if we're in some perhaps like hail damaged soybeans that are really short and maybe harder to get a hold of, then we may want to lower this lower stop, which would then lower this down, decrease this gap. If you're doing some, not in this part of the country, but if you happen to be doing wheat, by all means, then we would lower that down. It's only if we think that the crop mat is sitting there and the drum can't get a hold of it, or the feeder chain to move it rearward. So again, settings, drum stop, lower, upper, feeder faceplate. Same's on the other side of the feeder house. As we're also standing here, we're looking at our adjustment for our feeder chain on this vintage and older machines. When we go look at the other one, that's going to be a little bit different. But again, this is the draw bolt. Loosen these two up, move this back and forth. It's going to move this drum fore and aft to adjust the tension on our chain. So when we're talking about feeder chain tension, no different than it's ever been. And again, if you go back far enough, we had 2-strand chains, went to 3, and depending on whether you're on a class 6 or 8 machine, whatever. But the chain tension really hasn't changed all that much. With our draw bolts, we will adjust that tension so the lowest slat in here, and again you can't see it where I'm standing, you want it just banging like this on the floor. So in other words, it's not dragging on the floor, but if you push it by hand, it's about an 1/8 inch off. So that's how you tension the feeder chains with a manual adjust yet. And again, it needs to be done often during the season, especially if you're starting with a new chain. They will stretch initially quite a bit, so you want to keep an eye on this, because we don't want to let this, if we let this run loose too long, it's hard on a lot of things, drags on the floor, hard on the sprockets and everything else. The one option or addition that helps these machines greatly is what we've got right here, this roller system that gets added in. It was an aftermarket option, but it helps quiet these down. And it also extends chain life tremendously. So essentially it's a long rod in here, and you've got 3 rubber rollers, one here, here, and there under the strands of the chain itself. And it just acts, it helps get rid of some of this bounce that we would see up in this area. But again, it was an add-on option, but an excellent one to put in these feeder houses. So one thing to consider there too. So that's kind of the overview of, we're going to call this the older style of feeder house yet, the old original one. So as we look at this side of the feeder house, of course, it's going to be a mirror image of the other. Here's the end of that rod I was talking about, that roller set that we can add into these to smooth that chain out. Here again is our upper drum stop. Can't really see it, but it's down here is that lower drum stop. Lower drum stop is the one, it's got a flat part on the end of the bolt. You can put a wrench on to hold that, loosen the nut up, move it to where it needs to be then. Again, you're going to have the weight of the drum sitting on it. So typically you're going to want to have somebody there with a pry bar lifting up on it, or if you're by yourself, lift it up, put a wood block under it, and then you can move that very easily. Another thing to mention is don't forget about our rock trap. They only work if you clean them out periodically, I mean often. If they get totally packed full of dirt, if you scoop up dirt with a bean head, it will fill the rock trap. That packs in there and gets really hard, almost lets the rock hump right through there and get in the machine. So remember to dump your rock trap often. So again, on this side of the feeder house, mirror image of the other course, chain tension here, upper stop, or the drum arm stop I should say. We don't really on these, the upper drum stop in this type of feeder house is welded in, non-adjustable, you don't even see it. So this is what the drum sits on again down here. The amount it can travel upwards is limited by a welded in piece on this one inside of here. Again, our faceplate angle on this side. As we move back, again, our good rock trap back here, make sure we dump that. One thing I want to point out, this machine, again, still mid-range, similar to that roller that I pointed out before in that other one actually goes in where these are at on this one. So to me, that's my most highly recommended add-on option. If you want to gain feeder chain length and just quiet the feeder house down in general, add that roller kit in it. Parts guys at your whatever store you work with would be up to date on that. So that's where it goes on this one. So that kind of wraps up what I wanted to go over as far as the feeder house settings that we need to pay attention on to with this, because again, this is where successful harvest starts. Transitioning it from the head smoothly in here, form a nice crop mat, move it up, get it into the rotor cage. So this, to me, is step A. If we got big problems here, it could cause problems all the way through the rest of the machine. So that's why we want to try to get this fine-tuned as much as we can. This pretty well concludes what I wanted to go over on mid-range combine, just for some general setting things and that. Again, this is just a reference thing. It'll be a video posted on our redpowerteam.com website. I'll go over a lot of these same points in our in-house combine clinics we have coming up. But I want to have this stuff posted. That way, if we go, as you go through the clinic, if there's some point you want to go over again, you can just go back and reference it on one of the videos. You can even pull it up on your phone when you're out in the field if you want to look at something again. So again, thanks much for watching.